All right, welcome to another episode of the Cassels Cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be my boy Super Mario Hoops. We had a super fun conversation about 8 teams in the NBA who are just sort of stuck in the middle ahead of this trade deadline season and how this deadline will sort of dictate their future. And we looked even beyond the deadline into the offseason and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. With that being said, let's just get into the episode. Joining the show now is Super Mario Hoops. Discuss some teams that are just kind of stuck in the middle right now. But first things first, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Glad to be on. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely glad to have you on the show. So yeah, I think we can start things off with the Chicago Bulls because they're of course your favorite team. For most of the teams, I sort of have like specific questions, especially leading up to the deadline. But with the Bulls, I kept it kind of open. Where are you at with just this direction of the team in general, and what do you sort of expect them to do ahead of the deadline?
I think expectations are pretty low just because I've seen this team year after year do the same thing. Uh, and even lately, it's like, I don't know if you saw, there was a stat that we've started the last 4 years 18 and 21 in the first 39 games. And that's just the epitome of who we've been. Like, we've just been mid. I know that's like, maybe more of an outdated word. That's how long we've been mid, is because it was cool to say it 2 or 3 years ago, and we're still in the same exact spot. But and then like we'll get some wins against like some higher level teams, but then we'll lose to bad teams. Like the other day we lost to the Pacers and really should have won that game. Like I think so far this season, from what I've seen, we're like 11 and 12 against teams above 500, 12 and 12 against teams below 500. That's pretty bad. It's like you don't know if you have really any identity there. So just my expectation with this team right now is like we're not going to move very far. I know like we've had rumors saying we're going to try and make a playoff push and do something to get in that like top 8, but I see other teams that are just playing a lot better. And maybe teams who are below us who have been rising a bit, like I know the Hawks have caught us again, and the Hornets have looked pretty good recently, especially on the road. So I mean, these are a couple teams that could, take our spot. So my expectation though, like for the trade deadline's sake, I feel like, I mean, something has to happen. I know Kobe White's contract is, kind of nearing an end, and Vucevic is older, so I would think probably one, if not both of those guys, they're going to start listening to offers for. I personally like Kobe White, and even younger guys like Josh Giddey and Modest Buzelis. Like I think these guys, Trey Jones even, should be a part of the core long term. So I would try to field offers for Vucevic, see if you can get anything, maybe from contending teams, and maybe a couple other supporting players here or there. Definitely Patrick Williams. Don't know what value you're going to get from him though, but just trying to see what you can do like around this team aside from Giddy, Buzelis, and maybe Kobe, but I would still at least listen to offers right now for him.
Yeah, for sure. I think you summed it up nicely there. I mean, yeah, just sort of the epitome of average right now and no clear direction. But yeah, like you said, I would sort of look to sell in some of these guys, especially the expiring contracts that they have heading into the deadline. And I think especially like a guy like Kobe White could have some real value on the market, and I think it would be worthwhile for the Bulls to trade him. Sort of same thing with Vucevic, although I don't know how high his value is exactly, but I think it would be a good idea for the Bulls to at least trade one of those two and then at least trade a couple guys in that backcourt because there is kind of a logjam there. Even you look at like Trey Jones, he's a guy that I've been advocating for the Timberwolves to trade for a while, and even like Kobe White as well, or I would assume there's just a lot of options here, and I think it would be sort of in the Bulls' best interest to really bottom out and focus on the draft, just sort of one last time, get a good pick in this loaded draft class, and then sort of move forward. Really try to tear things down. I think would be ideal, but at the same time, I feel like this front office is like so committed to going for that playing spot and just trying to be like decent, and then getting like a back end of the lottery pick. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation, especially because of how long they've waited. I feel like if you had traded like Kobe White in the summer, his value would have been a little bit higher. If you had traded Vucevic like a year ago, his value would have been higher, etc. But yeah, is there like a guy like specifically you would like to be done with after the deadline, or are you just sort of at the place where you just want to look at offers and whoever yields an offer that makes sense, take that on? Yeah, where's your mindset at with that?
I think guys that I definitely want to get off of, I mean, like, Patrick Williams comes to mind definitely as the one. I mean, this is like the 6th year this guy's been on the team, and I know like sometimes when they're high draft picks, like and they maybe have potential, you want to wait a little bit longer because there might be something there. But it's the 6th year. Like, I mean, not really much has changed from the first year, and in a lot of ways, he still plays like he's a rookie. So it's like, how long can you really wait for a guy like this before he's, you know, gonna reach his stride? And I personally, I know people say, well, what about like when you had Lowry Markkinen on the team and like, he left and he became an all star? Like, I just don't see that from him. So I think that Patrick Williams is definitely number one. Vucevic, I've, again, like as well to bring him up. I would not be opposed to even someone like Io DeSumo. I know that a lot of Bulls fans really like him because he's, Chicago born and raised, but there's just too many games I feel like where he's a little bit inconsistent. I know his numbers are not too bad for the season. I think he's averaging a career high in points per game for us this year, but I definitely would at least like to listen to offers and see what you could get from him because I know he's still like 25 or 26 years old and maybe he could get you something back in return as well. As for like the rest of the guys, like I think Zach Collins, like I think at this point he just doesn't add much to our team. Listen to offers for Dalen Terry. I like Julian Phillips, but he's not getting a whole lot of playing time, so he's another guy you could listen to offers for, or like at least he wouldn't really make him like the centerpiece of a trade, but you could put him in these package deals, maybe alongside Io or if it's Kobe or Vucevic, whoever it may be, and then maybe even Javon Carter. Shout out to Roundball Renaissance. I know he's like the biggest Javon Carter fan I know, but at the end of the day, like we're just not like playing him. Although I went to the Bulls game the other day and I saw him drill like 13 threes in a row. Like I think it was at halftime, and I'm like, like he could still contribute, but just doesn't seem like he's gonna get that run in Billy Donovan's system right now. So those are like the guys I would at least like put on the block, like see what you can do. I personally like Jalen Smith as like our backup big, but ultimately he's not like a immovable player. Like if you are getting deals for him or if you want to see like what you can get from him too, I would check it out, but he's not like a priority to move. I'm totally fine with going past the deadline and having him on the team too. So that would be, I guess, like my assessment right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I feel like almost anything other than like a Modest trade or a Josh Giddey trade should be kind of on the table. I guess like a Senye, you wouldn't want to trade him because he's your rookie and he's been out for the majority of the season. But like outside of those three, I think like anything should be on the table. Obviously, you'd love to get off that Patrick Williams contract. I don't really know if there's a path unless it's like an Anthony Davis trade. So I don't know sort of your thoughts on that. I think that would be a little bit risky and you'd probably be going towards competing a little bit. But at the same time, I don't know how much Davis is going to play this season, so you can kind of do a little bit of both if that makes sense. So yeah, are you open at all to a Davis trade, or do you just want to totally get younger?
I'll say this. I think if, because salary wise, you're going to have to throw in like at least one of Patrick Williams or Vucevic. But I mean, if they wanted a deal, maybe around one or both of those guys, maybe throw in like, I wouldn't say like one of our like top young players, like you were saying, Giddy and Buzelis. I'm not including them in anything. But if it was like a Julian Phillips, which I think is a likely scenario, even if Jalen Smith was thrown in that offer, I would probably be okay with it. Maybe Dalen Terry, but I don't think he has much trade value. I'm gonna be real. And then if the draft compensation wasn't a whole lot, like I'm gonna be real. Like I think Anthony Davis is great, but I'm not willing to give up a whole lot of draft compensation for a guy who's like 33 years old and he has injury issues, like even more probably now than ever. So it's like I'm not willing to like mortgage the people who could be here for the next like 5 or more years. So that's why I would say like Vucevic, sure, Patrick Williams, sure, Dalen Terry, maybe Jalen Smith, and even that would, it would sting a little bit because like I said, I do like what he does for us as a backup, but I'm not trying to give up a bunch of picks I like with the Nets and Knicks trade like for Mikal Bridges, like how they just gave up like a ton of picks, like I'm not trying to do that for AD. Like I don't even know what that bar would be if it was like AD at his prime level, prime age, and if he was healthy. But I'm definitely not going to do it right now, like when he's 32, 33 years old.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Just trying to think of AD trade destinations for the last several months, I've had a really tough time. And the Bulls are one of the few teams that I can kind of talk myself into a little bit. But I definitely agree you can't overpay for him given his age and injury history. And yeah, I don't think they will at this stage, especially because he's dealing with yet another injury. But if he does get moved, they're one of the a few teams I could kind of see taking that gamble, but hopefully they don't overpay. I mean, regardless, I think we can both agree hopefully the Bulls just don't stand pat at the deadline and they sort of have a clearer direction a week from now. Another team
Yeah.
we can move ahead to in the East would be the Bucks. Obviously, this week was the big Giannis news. He kind of requested a trade, I guess. It looks like this is moving towards a trade at the deadline. It looks more probable than ever, let's say. It's not a guarantee still, but the likelihood has never been higher. But with that being said, I feel like the Bucks are in a really, really tough spot given that they don't own the vast majority of their future first round picks. So my sort of question is when looking at Giannis offers, if you're the Bucks, what are you sort of valuing, especially with your lack of draft capital, and how focused on potentially like a three-team trade with Portland? I know that's been thrown around a lot, especially with like the Knicks and Timberwolves. How focused are would you be on making a three-team trade just to get some of your draft capital?
I think it'll probably be a three-team trade. I feel like in recent years, like whenever you're moving a top 10 or top 15 player, a three-team trade usually is how it goes. I mean, I think like maybe the only exception I can think of off the top of my head right now is like when Durant like probably like went to the Suns like from the Nets like before even the Rockets won. But I would say for what they should be trying to get back is just a good deal, honestly. Like I think it's because they could go one of two ways. I'm not totally opposed with the Bucks going a direction kind of like the Clippers went, like after Chris Paul left, and it's like they still remained a little bit competitive. Obviously, eventually they got like Kawhi and Paul George, but like that time in between when they had like Lou Williams and Gallinari and Montrezl Harrell, like they didn't completely throw everything like out the window. Like they still were trying to compete every single year. And I think they could do that with this team. It'd be a lot more balanced of a squad. Kind of like reminds me of like 2012, 2013 Nuggets team with like Iggy and Ty Lawson. That team had Gallinari too. I think they could even go that direction, but also if they just want to completely go young and maybe start their rebuild and they're maybe tanking for a couple years. Like I'm totally okay with that because I mean they got Ryan Rollins. I know AJ Green's a little bit older, but I think that you got a couple guys there that could show some promise on the team. Kevin Porter Jr. is only like 25. It's just you don't have like those first or second year players that are showing you a whole lot of promise and it's like all right they're going to be the cornerstone for many years like the Mavericks with Cooper Flag or like the Hornets maybe with Con Knipple. Like I think that they have a little bit more older young guys, if that makes sense. Which similar to my Bulls, you know what I mean. So I don't know. I think that it might make a little bit of sense to go either way just because of that. Because I think if you trade Giannis for like two or three guys that are solid and they're in like their 27 to 30-year-old range, like you have guys who have experience, you have guys who have probably been to the playoffs, and you're gonna actually add to your depth as well. So I think one of those two directions, like definitely, but I would not like try to trade Giannis for another like high level superstar and who's maybe like aging and like try to do the same thing. Like do not do that. Like that would be a bad idea.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. And I mean, just sort of looking at some of the teams who are interested, I think it would obviously kind of be ideal for them if they were able to get the Trailblazers involved. We're going to talk about the Blazers in a bit, but at the same time, I just don't see there being a lot of incentive for the Blazers to trade those Milwaukee picks back, even if they are getting a guy like Mikal Bridges. I think he's a super impactful player, but I just think those Milwaukee picks are so valuable. I wouldn't personally move off of them. So I do think that sort of limits the three-team possibilities a bit. And then looking at like the other two teams that constantly get thrown around, the Heat and the Warriors, I think the Heat is sort of the best of both worlds. When you're talking about a guy like Tyler Hero, who can, be that all-star level player for you, keep you guys afloat a little bit while you don't have a bunch of your picks. You talk about Khalil Ware, a super high upside young big man who really just does need a change of scenery, but you can already see some of the signs of promise in Miami. You talk about a guy like Andrew Wiggins who's super impactful, and then they can throw in some picks. I think that could be a really interesting deal. And at this stage, I think that's sort of the best you're going to do for Giannis, given his injury history at this point, and given that a few teams have sort of backed out. We've heard that the Spurs aren't interested anymore, the Rockets, teams like that. So I think that limits their options a little bit. And I do think like this is the time for Miami to make a move. We'll talk about them in a second. But I would be really looking at Miami, and then the Warriors is super interesting. It's tough because it would have to be like Jimmy financially, and then probably like Kuminga as well as a ton of future first round picks, which are going to be super valuable. I just don't know if I would value the potential of picks 5, 6 years down the road, even with an aging roster in the Warriors, given that Jimmy probably isn't going to have a ton of value when he returns from this ACL injury. And Kuminga, who knows? And then from the Warriors side, like who even knows if they're gonna be willing to take that big of a risk because this has been a fairly conservative front office. So that sort of does lead me to like Miami or maybe like a dark horse team that could have a similar package like Philly or Toronto, where they throw in some win now talent, throw in some young talent, and throw in some draft capital. But I do believe, sort of like you said, like that's the best combination where they can get a little bit of everything.
Yeah, no, I think. Well, I will say too, I think the Warriors deal, and I know that's kind of like the deal that's been rumored that if they were to package something, it'd probably be around Jimmy and Kaminga. And I just feel like from the Bucks' perspective, it just doesn't make sense because it's like I wouldn't want to get a guy who's coming off an injury, who's older, and then another guy who, you know, they've reported like teams aren't really interested in Jonathan Kaminga, and also it's like, what if the rumors that maybe he's just as much a problem there, like they influence the Bucks as well. So I think it'd have to be like a lot of draft compensation if that's the case, and I just don't think the Warriors are willing to do that. But I think the Heat could be a little bit interesting. I even said on my own show earlier this season, like I had my guys from the 3 Point Weekly podcast on, and we all talked about like what's a team that really should just like they just need to like start over or do something new. And a lot of them kind of said teams in the lottery. And I said to myself, I'm like, I think the Heat should. And they're like, well, that's crazy because at the time they were like the third or fourth seed. But I just feel like it's the same song and dance every single year for this team. They're always in the play in. Like, yeah, they've made the finals like a couple times in the last like 6 or so years. But I just think that at this point, like, they have to know that they have such a ceiling, and that ceiling is like maybe a second round appearance if everything goes right. So I just think like that could be a great move, and also I feel like with the trade that you mentioned, like maybe for Khalil Ware, like I wasn't really thinking about that because I feel like you know he's definitely one of those young guys that I would want to build around, but at the same point, it's like you're trading for Giannis, and some of those guys like Bam and Hero, like Norman Powell, they might fit like the timeline a little bit better with Giannis. So yeah, I think that that's a good one. And then those other two teams, I'd say like Toronto could be a good sneaky one. I just think that he fits their identity a bit, and I think that's why over the years, like there's been some light rumors every now and then, but yeah, I would say out of those, I think Miami might be the best. I still don't know how great that team would be, just because I think they would be missing a decent amount of shooting. But I think timeline wise, it does make the most sense out of all those teams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what it comes down to for me is like those three teams is like what do you really have to lose, especially in this Eastern Conference, which is just so wide open. I don't know if adding Giannis would make any of them clear favorites. I don't think so at all, personally, but it gives them a chance, which right now I don't think any of those three teams have a chance to come out of the East, quite frankly. Maybe you're a little bit higher on one of them, especially like Philly. I think that's fair, but regardless, it gives them like a much higher ceiling, and especially with the Heat, which we can transition to them in a bit. But yeah, I mean, they do really need a more clear sense of direction, and I do think trading for Giannis would help them get there. Where has had his run-ins with Eric Spoelstra, I think it is time for a change of scenery, even though he's only in his second year. It just seems like something's a little bit fractured with that relationship. And then you look at Hero; they don't really want to extend him. I think that's a bit of a red flag. So you could move off him, and then Wiggins, solid player, and then picks. Obviously, that is a nice incentive for the Bucks, and it's a bit of a risk. But like at that point, if you're adding a top 5 level player, like who really cares? I feel like that's kind of a no-brainer. My
Yeah.
question though with Miami is if they strike out on Giannis, which time and again, this is a team that has been linked to stars. Damian Lillard, Kevin Durant, Giannis, you name it. They're linked to every single star who's hitting the market, and time and again, they can't make a move. So my question is, if they're not able to pull off a move for Giannis at the deadline, and let's say he goes somewhere else, let's say just hypothetically he goes to the Warriors or whatever the case may be, do you think they could maybe pivot into a mini rebuild either at the deadline or probably a little bit more likely in the offseason?
See, that I feel like would be the logical move, but I don't know. I've just seen so many years where, they're very similar to the Bulls. It's just that they've actually like, when the playoff switch came around, they actually activated another notch, whereas we don't. But other than that, like everything else has been pretty similar. Like you find yourself in the same seating. Everyone knows you're probably not going to have a realistic chance. And I don't know. It just felt like for so long, like they should have been a team that's gotten someone like that, like a top level free agent or a top level star via trade. You mentioned Dame and you mentioned Durant, and I've seen even like Kawhi rumors at times and Embiid rumors, for a while, like, but none of it's happened. So it's like after a while, like you got to start thinking like, do you just like pull the plug on it? Like I feel like they should. Like if they don't get Giannis, I think that they eventually, should maybe like this offseason even like you said. But I just don't know if they're going to actually do it. I think they're just going to stay content like in that mid ground. And I mean, yeah, like they do have young players too, like Hawkes and Khalil Ware and stuff that they could help them become even better. I know Tyler Hero's missed a lot of this season, and he was just an all star like a year ago, so like that could obviously help. And getting all these guys together, like Davion Mitchell's had a great year, and that's a little bit maybe under the radar because of the year Norman Powell's had and stuff like that. But I don't know. I just think that they're gonna probably still sit in the same kind of area. It's what they say. It's not a play in if the Heat, the Bulls, and the Hawks aren't in it. So I mean, it's probably just going to be another one of those kind of years. But I do think they should try their best to make a move for Giannis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. I feel like this organization, I mean, Pat Riley is just not a guy who is willing to embrace a rebuild, especially because he is on the older side. So I definitely agree. Even if they strike out on Giannis, I could totally see them. Norman Powell's a free agent, so I could totally see them just re-signing Powell, letting it play out with Hero. Maybe they extend him, maybe they don't. Keeping Bam, not listening to any offers for him, and just sort of continue to be this like perennial playing team. And I like the comparison to the Bulls. But I do agree that the Heat, it's a little bit more logical to sort of hold out this false hope just because they did have that magical run in 2023. I mean, I still can't believe they made the finals that year, but I feel like that continues to give them hope 3 years later when it probably shouldn't. And then with Giannis, I feel like this has been always the guy that they'll push their chips in for. And if they don't this time, if I was a Heat fan, I would be a little bit frustrated because it's like, I get it. You don't want to trade for an aging Kevin Durant. You don't want to sell the farm for him, whatever. For Giannis, like this has to be the guy, or else they're quite frankly probably never gonna get like a big name star other than like a Norman Powell move where they can just get an all-star level player for cheap. But yeah, big picture with this team, I also just don't think like Powell and Hero make a ton of sense. So in the offseason, even if it's not like committing to a rebuild, and they don't get Giannis hypothetically, I could see them moving off of one of them. Maybe they let Paul walk somewhere, do a sign and trade of sorts there, or they just trade Hero, especially with that extension coming up. But I do think one way or another, this team is like poised for a shakeup within the next few months.
Yeah, and I would even just to add to that, I feel like, you know, if you remember, like obviously there were big rumors of Giannis coming to the Heat in 2020, like after he won his second MVP and they beat him in the bubble, and they're like, all right, well Giannis is definitely not staying. Like he doesn't want to play on the Bucks because he'll never win there. And then the year after, obviously they won the championship, but like that was Giannis. Like he still obviously is a top three player in the league, in my opinion, probably the second best player in the league. But I would say that was like Giannis at his probably peak athleticism. Obviously he still has it, but he is a little bit older, of course. And it's like this is probably the best time, if any, to get Giannis. You know what I mean? Like he just said he's completely fine leaving the Bucks. Like it's official, and it could happen as soon as in a week's time. So it's yeah, I don't know. I feel like they just have to try what they can, and even if they don't do it, like there just can't be like that rumor that came out where it's like oh, the Heat were offered this and they declined it. I feel like there's always one of those where it's like, oh, they were holding off on like Tyler Hero or they were holding off on like Hawkes and stuff. And it's like, but you're getting Giannis. Like at the end of the day, like there's not one player on that team that's worth more than Giannis. And that includes Bam and that includes Powell and, whoever else you want to name. Like, this isn't. Even Eric Spoelstra, as great as he is, like, you know, just doesn't, there's nothing.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And I love that point about Giannis going back to like 2020 when there was rumblings that, potentially he could leave Milwaukee. And the Heat were brought up as that like suitor. This has been their guy for years. I think it's finally time to make the move, especially with the market sort of dwindling and teams potentially having better offers in the offseason with like the Knicks and Timberwolves getting those extra picks in the offseason. Like this is the time for Miami to make a move. And if they don't, I don't know exactly where they go from here, but I still think like a shakeup is inevitable. You brought up the Hawks as that other perennial playing team in the East, so I feel like it's only fitting that we move ahead to talk about them. Really in an interesting spot in this post Trae Young era. They were linked to Anthony Davis for a while. I don't think that's going to happen at this point, and I don't know if anything else is going to happen at the deadline, but I'd like to get your opinion on that. And then just in general, they do have likely a top 5 pick coming in either via the Pelicans or the Bucks, thanks to that crazy Derek Queen trade on draft night. But beyond that, they also have like $70 million in cap space. So yeah, how do you see them navigating this deadline? And then thinking ahead a little bit to the offseason, do you think they're gonna maybe go in a more rebuilding direction despite this cap space, or do you think they're gonna be a bit more aggressive?
Well, I definitely think they won't make anything else really in terms of big moves because, I mean, they already traded Trey Young away. But I do think that, I personally like the identity that the Hawks have right now. I feel like they have, you know, not that I'm not trying to say that Trey Young is a bad player by any means because he's one of the best point guards in the league, but I think it's very similar. Maybe you could even attest from this because of the Celtics as your team, like Isaiah Thomas, like when he was on the squad, and it's like he was one of the best players in the league at his best, but you also needed a pretty ideal team around him for him to thrive. And that's why he almost averaged like 30 points a game that year. Like it was just an insane year. I think it's very similar to Trey Young, like just because like he is maybe a smaller guard and on the defensive end, he might have his like lapses in some areas, but I feel like this team definitely improves in that way right now. Of course, like Zachary Reese has been out, and Porzingis has missed a lot of games this season, and someone's got to check on that guy because I've never seen a guy with more illnesses in a season than Porzingis. I think it's just insane. But that's besides the point. I think that they have a pretty solid team, and I wouldn't make anything drastic in terms of moves. I think Alexander Walker has been great. I know Dyson Daniels has had a rough like shooting year, but I mean, I still don't think he's done anything too bad to the point where it's like, all right, now we got to look at trading him. And I think Okongwu's played fine. I think that Risa J, like, he's been okay. I feel like people just hate on him a little too much because he was the first overall pick, and they're like, yeah, he's the worst one ever. But I mean, he's still not playing that bad. He's just in his second year. I feel like people should kind of give him a little bit of a break. If you want to like suggest maybe some of those other guys like at the bottom, like see what like Luke Kennard, maybe Keaton Wallace a little bit because he doesn't like play a whole lot, but I don't know. I think other than that, like I wouldn't really make anything too crazy move wise. I feel like I don't know, like maybe it's just me like being against the Bulls and just like what they've seen so far, but I feel like they'll probably pass them in the standings by the end of the year, and they'll definitely make it interesting with the Heat. And I think at the very least, getting into the play-in will help this team because it's like for so many years, whether it's playoffs or play-in, it's like they've had Trey Young to depend on, and ever since that 2021 run, it's like he was kind of their leader, like their on the court leader. Now it's going to be like, all right, who's going to be that guy? And I mean, they have some veterans that can make it done, like CJ McCollum, like just added to the team too. But I think right now they're going to stand pat a little bit to answer your question. And I would just maybe assess it by the time the off season hits. I mean, none of these. I wouldn't say none of these, but there's a decent amount of players that they could move in the summer if they want to. But I think right now they're probably fine because they just made the Trey Young trade.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I mean, after trading Trey Young, I don't think they have like another big move left. And I do think even though the package wasn't necessarily ideal by any means, it was the right decision to move on from him, obviously. And I do like this new era that they're in. Jalen Johnson's just awesome. So I'd be excited to sort of build around him if I was a Hawks fan. And then yeah, the surrounding pieces are really interesting. They just have a ton of size and length. Another guy I really like is Onyeka Konwu. I think he's really sort of having that breakout year that a lot of fans, including myself, had been hoping for a few years with him. He's really putting it all together this season. So he's another exciting part of their team. And then yeah, Riza Shea, I do think gets criticized a lot, and I get it. Yeah, he probably shouldn't have been the number one pick, but I do think he has some level of potential as like a high quality role player at the very least. And I mean, I'm just in general super excited to see what this team does in the big picture. I think it's a blessing in disguise that they're out of the Anthony Davis sweepstakes. I never really loved that idea. It's like to me, when you have like upwards of $70 million in cap space next summer, it's probably not a good idea to just pot commit that to Anthony Davis. I mean, who knows? Maybe they could even be a sneaky Giannis destination. I don't think that's super likely, but I wouldn't totally rule it out. And I would much rather use it towards like a Giannis caliber of guy compared to Anthony
Hmm.
Davis. But yeah, regardless, I am interested to see how they use this cap space and how the lottery shakes out because they could be adding a top three pick easily with this unprotected Bucks Pelican swap. The Bucks are obviously fading in the standings, and the Pelicans have been like the worst team in the West all season long. So it's a really, really valuable asset. Obviously, talked about a million times. That trade's just still insane. But hypothetically, like if you add like a Darian Peterson to this core, that's really interesting to me, especially just with the size that they have around him. Or if you go and you add another like big win like AJ DeMonsta, I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities. Obviously, if you're adding any of these top three guys, that's super intriguing for any team, but especially the Hawks. I'm really interested to see how that plays out. And then if they do end up getting a top three pick, I wonder how they sort of utilize that cap space. Are they going to be like a team that just throws money at a bunch of restricted free agents or something? Another idea that I've been floating around a little bit is with all this cap space, like why not throw a bag at Austin Reeves, see what happens? I think he's probably going to stay with the Lakers ultimately, but if I was a team like the Hawks, why not see what you can get? I feel like they'd have a nice core to surround him with. So I do think they're going to ultimately head in the right direction, whether that be going a little bit younger or finding a way to utilize this cap space to rise up a weakened Eastern Conference.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And even on top of that, like with the will probably be the Pelicans pick because they're already so down there. And it probably is a top three pick, whether it's Darren Peterson or it could be AJ Debonsa or Cam Boozer. Like I think those are like the big three for this draft class. And I feel like most of them are kind of like around the same mold as most of the players on their team. So I mean, it could be even one way or another where it's like, maybe they think, all right, we get a draft pick of one of those guys. Maybe we trade someone at one of those positions, whether it's like, could be even like Risa J or something like that. Even though I will say, like with him, as you were saying too, like I don't think he'll ever be like a star, but it does remind me maybe a little bit like a guy who actually the Hawks had years ago, like 2 decades ago, and like Marvin Williams, because I think like he has defensive potential. He can hit a 3 pointer every now and then, but he's not going to be like a superstar or anything probably. But I also don't think he'll be like a draft bust. So, but also I think if you're another team like and you're interested in one of those picks or players, I think you're probably going to choose the picks more than likely. They might have more value because I think people are, you know, they're always more enticed by, I guess, the idea of what could be as opposed to like what they've already seen. So someone might throw a lucrative offer at like whatever pick that is, if it's even the third pick or something, or the second pick, and definitely if it is the first pick. But I think that could definitely help them where it's like, hey, now we got like two or three more guys around Jalen Johnson. Maybe we got another star instead. Like, and you just want to get the guy who can like fit the mold of the team as well. Like, if they can do that, I think that they're going to be really set because even before the year, I thought this Hawks team would be a top 3 or 4 seed, just like with all the moves that they made. And obviously, it didn't really work out totally with Trey Young, but I've seen flashes of this team, like with this core, making it like work out to an extent that I feel like if you add like one more high level guy or a couple more pieces to surround them, like they're gonna be like even better. They're gonna be up there probably as a top 4 team in the East.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I had high expectations for them as well. So yeah, I can't blame you for that. But I think overall they are in a good spot. So yeah, super interested to see how things play out for Atlanta. But I think we can move ahead to the West, and we already talked about them briefly, but I think we should start off with the Warriors. And I think my big question for the Warriors here is, can you salvage the last few years of prime Stephen Curry, especially with the Jimmy Butler injury? And I'll throw in the caveat without trading the farm for Giannis. So hypothetically, if they're not able to trade for Giannis, do you see there being any path for this team to remain competitive in any sense of the word during these last few years with Prime Curry?
Well, I will say I know that obviously the Warriors, kind of similar to like the Clippers for like the longest time, like just their payroll is so much higher than a lot of other teams, and part of that is because of their ownership. But I think it makes it a little bit hard to make a deal to maybe get a guy who can bolster their team in some of those areas. Obviously, like you said, now like without Jimmy, like for a while, like that's gonna definitely take a hit on scoring. Even though I wouldn't really classify Jimmy Butler as like a high level like scorer or anything, but compared to this Warriors team, like he was their second option. So it's like now that's going to take a huge hit, and it's like, are you going to hope that Brandon Podziemski or is it like Draymond or D'Anthony Melton? Like I don't think that's a reliable like second or third option on any given night, and they're definitely going to have to make a deal. I also think that for the longest, I mean, this is a team that I just think doesn't really have a total direction of what they're doing, and you could probably tell that by the offseason because like they waited like 4 months to sign Al Horford, who's like 39 years old, and he's hasn't really been all too impressive. And I know he's had some games here or there, but that should almost be like the staple of like, all right, this team has problems. Same thing with the whole Jonathan Kaminga thing. So in terms of just salvaging what Curry has the rest of his years, obviously Curry is still like an all-star level player. I think I would still put him probably in the top 10 players in the league. I think that, at his apex, you could argue he's the best player in the league. I don't think he's at that point anymore, but I think that he's still like in that like 5 to 10 range probably. But usually for players that are in that category, they need to have like a great supporting cast. And I think that Draymond is, maybe not quite the player that he was in previous years. I know his scoring is actually pretty high for his standards this year, but still like that's mostly because this team is really, they got problems that they need to address. And I don't think a Giannis trade or whatever it may be like at the deadline, I don't think there's going to be like that star that you can pair up with Curry that's just going to come so easily. So yeah, it's very interesting to see like how this team is kind of, I wouldn't say like fallen, but kind of lost their mojo in a sense because it's like, well, they lost the finals in 2016. They get Kevin Durant. Up, they lost Kevin Durant. They signed D'Angelo Russell after an All Star year, and then they make a trade for Andrew Wiggins, and he becomes an All Star. I just don't know if that's really possible anymore to do that. So, I mean, yeah, they could definitely be a playoff team any given year. They could even make it this year, although right now they're hanging in eighth, and the Clippers are like right behind them, and they've played insane. So it's looking pretty rough for them to hold that eighth spot. But either way, I think that it's something's gonna have to happen. Like, and unfortunately for them, they might have to cut ties with Draymond, as tough as that is. Like, you just have to move off of guys to, build around Curry. And you don't want Curry to leave because if Curry leaves, like, I mean, yeah, you could, I guess, jump start your rebuild, but you're going to be bad for a while. It's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously Giannis is the guy that's gonna get thrown around until he's eventually moved. I think we sort of discussed it earlier. Like, it's just I don't think it's like super optimal for the Bucks. I think there's just better offers out there. I think that's the reality for them. But even with the Giannis trade, like I wouldn't view this team as like a top tier contender. I think they would be a pretty good team in the West. Maybe they could get into that like top five ish range. But they're just so limited with their depth, honestly. And then you'd have to gut some of that and then mortgage your entire future for Giannis, which I think for the Warriors for one last run with Steph, it would be worth it. I just don't think it would be like a perfect scenario where they're gonna return to title contention. I think the front office like kind of realizes that at this point, like there's no scenario where you're gonna get Curry another championship. That's fine, obviously. He won four championships. He's had an amazing career, but it does kind of sting to go out on this note, and I do definitely agree with the Draymond point. It's like, why not at this point? Cut ties with Draymond. I mean, you already moved on from Clay. Why not make a move for Draymond? I do think he has some sort of value, especially for like a younger team. I know he's a goofball, let's be honest, and he has a lot of, anger issues and stuff like that. So, the attitude issue, it's real, but at the same time, he is an NBA champion and he is a leader in a real way. So I do feel like for like a young team, like getting him as that like veteran presence, almost as crazy as that sounds, could be something teams could talk themselves into. And I still think he has immense value as a defensive player. So I do think he's a real asset for them, especially if you don't want to trade picks unless it's like a Giannis scenario. Like, yeah, you're probably gonna have to trade like Draymond if you want to find a good move. I don't think Jimmy Butler has much value because he has a torn ACL and he's aging. I know his
Yeah.
contract isn't like super long term, but it's just like, what are you gonna do? Like, Kuminga doesn't have any value apparently, unless you attach significant draft capital, which they've been hesitant to do. So yeah, I mean, maybe if they strike out on Giannis, I could see them making a move for like a Michael Porter Jr. type of guy. At the same time, I think they're still going to be within that playing mix in a loaded Western Conference, and you're just kind of stuck in the same spot. I mean, the reality is this team has like two gaping holes, and that's secondary creation and center play, and you're not going to be able to solve both of those at the trade deadline again, unless it's like this miracle scenario where you get Giannis, but you have to like mortgage your entire future. So kind of a rough spot. And yeah, I mean, just as like a Steph Curry fan, like it kind of stings to see him go out on this note because he's still playing just incredible basketball despite his advanced age, and the team hasn't really done much to surround him with like a good competent roster. Despite like the Jimmy Butler trade, I thought that was a nice move. That definitely helped them a lot, but I mean, ultimately, this team is just so far away, and I don't think they can really get to a level where they're clear contenders.
And I mean, even like the financial constraint as well has been a problem for years with this team. I mean, this is a team that I know for like the longest they had to wait like a month before they could like move off of certain guys so they could sign Seth Curry. And I'm like, like if I was like personally like someone like a Seth Curry or an Al Horford, and it's like, yeah, okay, it's admirable that they're waiting for me, but at the same time, it's like if they got to try and pull this many strings, you're like, oh, just wait for me, and it's like I'm a proven, if you're Al Horford, you're a proven multi-time All Star, and if you're Seth Curry, it's like I'm a proven shooter that's been in the league for over almost a dozen years. So it's like, why should I care? I guess like Seth in a little bit more because his brother was there, but if I was Al Horford, I would think like that. But I also think part of it too is, you know, I mentioned like pretty much everything could be like on the table. Like they could move off of anything. You want to keep Curry though, but I think that even could include like Steve Kerr. As unfortunate as it is, like I know he's been coaching the team for a while now. So I'm pretty sure now with obviously Popovich isn't coaching anymore. I'm pretty sure he's the second longest tenured coach with behind Spolstra. So like at that point, it's like you might want to consider maybe your time is done because you know that you're probably not going to win another one. And I get maybe he wants to like stay till the end of like Curry's career and Draymond's career because these are guys that he's been with like from day one. But I also think that Steve Kerr wants to play a certain style that maybe other coaches don't want to, and I think maybe that's what the Warriors could need as well. And it could help them to like if you had a different coach in there that wants to play like a totally different game plan, like that might be also what they need. Like I'm thinking of when the We Believe Warriors, for instance, like they got that unit together and Don Nelson was the coach and like they just played a completely different inspired version of basketball and they win as an 8 seed and maybe they need something like that as well. I just don't know when it's going to happen because it seems like they want to keep Draymond around and they want to keep some of these other guys around for a while. Obviously not Kaminga, but like most of the other guys like it seems like they want to keep around Steph and obviously they want to keep Steve Kerr around. So it's just like finding a way to get off of that in a mutual way. You also don't want to like break ties completely like not to mention the current Warrior, but like when Jimmy Butler left the Heat and that was a guy who was probably top 5 or 6 Heat player ever. Probably would have got his jersey retired. And the way that went was so sour. They're like, you know what? Welcome to the team, Andrew Wiggins. Here's Jimmy Butler's number. So you definitely don't want like some disrespect to that degree. But yeah,
Absolutely. I'm really happy you brought up the Kerr point because I did see something last week, I believe, that a lot of people around the Warriors are bracing for this to be Kerr's last year. So I think that's a really strong possibility. Believe his contract is up, and it would just sort of be like a mutually parting ways thing. And yeah, I mean, getting a fresh voice in there, get a new system that could work. I do think Kerr has certain limitations as a head coach. The way he's handled this Kuminga thing is baffling. But at the same time, especially, I mean, we talked about trading Draymond. I think we both agree it's sort of a good area to explore. If you're moving on from these guys, like, you better make damn sure that you're finding like quality replacements and you're just not moving on from Draymond or mutually parting ways with Kerr or whatever just to do it. Because I feel like there's a scenario where it's like that meme with the guy just standing alone in the room, where it's like Curry's like, who are these guys? Like, what? It's just an entirely different roster, and we're still bad, and that could ultimately lead to him being like, yeah, maybe I don't want to finish my career here, which would really feel weird. I can never imagine Curry in a different uniform. He's just one of those guys. But yeah, it's a really weird spot, and I have heard like also some buzz about like maybe LeBron goes there, and yeah, maybe, but at the same time, like LeBron in his probably his last year of his career next year, how much of an impact is he really going to make on the Warriors? Sounds crazy to say, but yeah, it's just a really weird situation, and yeah, I do agree that Kerr could be on his way out, and I also like that point earlier about like making these guys wait. It's just so crazy, man, because like waiting Al Horford, especially like you said, just waiting that long to sign a contract is insane. And I also think it's hilarious as a Celtics fan that he went to worst team.
Yeah, I agree. I think also one other thing, like, I mean, I love Mike Dunleavy when he played for my Chicago Bulls and everything, but I think maybe it wasn't the wisest decision as well to put him like kind of main man in charge of this team when he hasn't really shown any like experience before that point. Like, see, that's one thing I kind of hate, like, just with a lot of NBA jobs like that. And I always look back at like Steve Nash coaching the Nets because, like, I mean, I know you probably know like Derrick Rose is my favorite point guard ever, but Steve Nash is my second favorite point guard ever, and I feel like he was just set up to fail, like in that situation. And of course, you could argue they were just a toe away from winning a championship, but I think people just like remember him as like a notoriously bad head coach. And I'm not saying that like Mike Dunleavy necessarily is, but I don't think he should have been asserted into that role maybe so quickly.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I feel like Bob Myers just kind of got out at the perfect time. He knew that some tough decisions would have to be made, and he didn't want to be the guy. He's remembered forever as this designer of the dynasty. At some point, I feel like he wouldn't be viewed as positively. Maybe he would probably would do a better job than Mike Dunleavy. And I agree, like he was put in a tough position. I just think in general, man, like when I look at this organization from ownership to the front office to the coaching staff, everyone just has a different vision and there's no organizational alignment. I think that's a really big problem. And it is kind of funny to think about. Obviously, it was a while ago, and even like the 2022 championship, that just seems like a fever dream at this point. But like, this was just such a respected organization like 8, 10 years ago. And they've had like a real fallen from grace, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm couldn't agree more. I feel like I even wondered too, like, especially with Steph. I mean, I would assume he ends his career with the Warriors, but I think like the only other team I could really see him playing like a year or two on would be like the Hornets, just because he grew up there. But that would be kind of cool. Like, I mean, if he, especially if like, not to throw Lamelo out exactly, but if he were playing like point guard alongside like Brandon Miller and Con Caneppel, like him and Con Caneppel could be an interesting backcourt, especially with the shooting.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like the Charlotte thing has been thrown around a lot, and I've always been like, dude, like they're kind of bad, but this year they're like kind of on the up and up, and the Warriors are
Yeah,
falling down. I'm like, I can actually like see the Charlotte vision for the first time ever, but there's just like so
it
few.
would be exciting one way or another. Like I'm here for it.
Exactly. It would be a cool way for him to go out for sure. I kind of just want him to stay with the Warriors because it's so rare to get one team guys, and he's like
Mm.
probably like the last like real maybe like Jokic, I guess. But yeah, I mean, who knows? I'm gonna enjoy watching Steph Curry play basketball wherever he goes, to end his career for sure. I think we can move ahead to the Blazers now. Another team that has been in these Giannis rumors in a different way as a third team facilitating it. They sort of feel like they want to be competing, especially, they make that Drew Holiday trade. That was a big surprise to really everyone. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, they have Denny Avdija, who's a really high quality player, all-star level guy. And it seems like they're just really trying to make a push for the playoffs right now, in my opinion. But yeah, ultimately, do you think like there's a way where they make a big move without it being like a third team move in the Giannis trade? Do you think they should do that, or do you think they should just like try to focus on like a younger movement? Because Denny is still like 25 years old. So yeah, where are you at with the Blazers?
I mean, I don't know if they would need to make a move exactly, but I do think that, they're definitely one of the teams, probably of all the teams we're talking about here today, like the team that you could get most excited about just because, like, they are a younger team. They have veterans. They have guys that are probably going to get better. And just over on the sideline, they got probably their best player, Damian Lillard, who has not even played a game yet this season, and he probably won't. Excited just for what this team has. I mean, Denny Avdia is more than likely, like within the next couple days here, going to be named an All-Star reserve. So, I mean, that's just a big like confidence boost for a guy like that, especially like I think the way he was treated like early on in his career, like I feel like everyone was saying like, oh, bust, and he's not going to make it. He's really not all that, and even myself, I had some concerns. I don't know if I went as far to say like, bust or anything, but I think that he's definitely made strides, and you've seen it right now, and I think like him and Dame next season is going to be exciting. And that's kind of the big thing for me is, you know, Portland's great like right now, like they're a play-in team that could even make the playoffs, but I think that likeliest scenario they're going to make the play in. Even if they do not make the playoffs, it's going to be a good experience for Denny Avdia, for Kamara, for Shaden Sharp, and like some of these guys like Donovan Clingan, who maybe have not had, I guess, too many games in this scenario, or maybe ever in this scenario in the NBA. I think even like Caleb Love has been like a blessing in disguise. Like it feels like he kind of came out of nowhere. City Sissoko, I know he started like a lot of games for them, and I get to what Tiago Splitter's been doing, like having him start as more of a specialty player. Although I wish like he wouldn't in some of those cases, but of course they've had injuries. I just think that you have a lot of areas that turn there, and then it's like you got Drew Holiday, who's a multi-time NBA champion, and you got Robert Williams, who contributed to a finals team, and if Thibault's healthy, and like there's just like a lot of players I feel like on this team, and those are the young teams that you want. I think between them and I mean you could even say like the cast around Devin Booker and Phoenix and stuff, like they just like having a whole lot of guys who can play their role perfectly, maybe like 7 to 8 guys on any given night that can give you 10 a game. And there's not really a defensive weakness I would say on this team. I think honestly, like as crazy as it sounds, once Dame comes back, he might be the biggest defensive weakness because we don't know how he's going to look defensively after his injury. But I'm still expecting him probably to get like 20 a night, and he might not even be the first option. He might defer like, okay, Denny, you're the number one, I'm the number two, but I'm still going to be the one that can close games for you. So I think this Portland team, maybe that's like the one thing too that I noticed at the end of games that they're missing. I know Denny Avdia has hit like I think he hit that shot against. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was against the Spurs when he hit like that step back three that was clutch to like win it. But I mean, ultimately, Damian Lillard is one of the most clutch players in the league, and in NBA history. So you add that to this team, a guy who can shoot, a guy who can play make, like it's just going to make everyone's life so much easier. And that's why I think like this year is just about development. Next year, you could have pretty much the main 8 to 10 guys in this rotation and go into next year with the hopes of we could not only just be like a playoff team, but we could be like in a situation of where the Spurs are right now, where it's like we're a top 2 or 3 seed. We could win a playoff series. Maybe we could win two. I think that they have that much potential.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, this has just been one of my favorite teams to watch in the league, honestly. They're on late a lot of times. They have like that standalone game or whatever late at night. So yeah, they've just been an awesome watch. And Denny has been. I'm not just saying this. I've had plenty of takes where I've been just way off, but Denny has been a guy that I've believed in for a really really long time, dating back to those Washington years. I got plenty of receipts for that. But yeah, it's been great to see what he's done this season. He's even surprised me a little bit. I'll be honest. But yeah, he's a super fun guy, and I totally agree. Like once they get Dame back next year, it's going to be huge just to have that extra creator, especially on the perimeter next to him, because that is something they're definitely lacking. Just offense in general. I think they need a little bit more shooting, a little bit more creation, but it's not like a pressing need where I feel like they need to go out and make a big move. It's like this is just like a fun, like kind of young team with some like experience. It's a nice balance, honestly. I've appreciated the way they've sort of retooled after trading Dame, and then obviously you get it back a couple of years later. But yeah, this has been a fun team in general, and I do think I just don't see the incentive being there in terms of like the Giannis aspect of this in terms of pulling off a three-team trade. I would just hang on to those Bucks picks for dear life, to be honest. I know like Mikal Bridges is a super high quality player. Maybe they get like Jaden McDaniels, OG Anunoby, whatever. I would just keep those picks, man. I think like all three of those players would be awesome fits in their system. At the same time, I would really value those picks, even if it means like you get off like Jeremy Grant's contract as well. It's just the idea that those picks could be super high and the idea that this team could rise up a little bit more and eventually use those picks to get a bigger name. I think there's just so many possibilities there that if I'm Portland, I'm keeping them. And I'm just, yeah, sort of focused on the team I have now. I would like to see them make like some sort of move, like a minor move for like a 3-point shooter or something like that. But nothing like totally insane at the deadline, to be honest. And yeah, it sort of sounds like you're in the same position where it's like, what's really the point of them like doing the Bucks a favor essentially by helping orchestrate like a three-team Giannis deal?
Yeah, and I think the one thing too, and this is why I feel so, I guess, confident about how they're gonna rise up next season is like a lot of these young teams, like the year before they make that move, like they get a win, they get at least like one win on like a lot of these like top tier teams. Like, I mean, you think they were the first team to beat OKC this year. You know, they got that big win against the Spurs. They got a win early. I think maybe two wins actually against Denver. I know at least one of them early on, and some of those were clutch games too. So the fact that you add in another guy who the last time we saw him was an all star, you could argue all NBA level player. Because I feel like personally, like Dame in Milwaukee gets a bad rep, but I feel like he was underrated. Like when people talk about like what he actually did there, and yeah, like they're just gonna be an interesting team. Like I would love to see a Final Four in the West next year. So like second round matchups, the teams include like the Thunder, the Nuggets, the Spurs, and the Trailblazers, like in some way, shape, or form. Because it's like you got the Nuggets who won the championship a couple years ago, maybe more veteran experience, and then the Thunder won the title, but they're a little bit younger, and the Spurs are this young team, but they'll have a year under their belt of playoff experience, most likely after this year. And then you got Portland, who's just like, coming out of nowhere, but they got some vets, but they're kind of new to the mix. And then, I would love to see how that would shape out. Because I think any of those teams could get through the West if that was how it looked.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I agree that this team next year is going to be taking a big rise. I mean, we'll see what they do in the offseason. Like we talked about, don't expect them to do a whole lot at the deadline, although maybe they get involved in the Giannis trade stuff. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that could really make that jump. And I feel like every year it's kind of an unexpected young team, but the writing is on the wall the year before. I mean, you look at like the Houston Rockets a little bit, the year before last, they had a lot of like signs that they were going to make this jump. And then even the Spurs. So I feel like they could fall into that camp as well. And yeah, just a super fun team. And definitely, I agree. This is like a team where they kind of have a sense of direction. And I do trust like this organization. And like you said, I mean, they've had some really impressive wins. They have a legitimate all star level guy in Denny. And I've just been so impressed with Tiago Splitter as well. I know you talked about him earlier, but I just want to give him a shout out quick because he was thrown into a really tough spot with Chauncey getting caught up with the Mafia and stuff like that. But yeah, he was just thrown into a tough spot and he's thrived, especially with all the injuries they've dealt with. For them to be in the play-in mix, I think it says a lot about this team, but also him as a coach.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I even was someone who, I like Chauncey obviously as a player, but I think that especially with the timing of it happening so soon in the season, like this could have been a completely different Portland team. Like they could have 10 more losses than wins right now if Chauncey was still on the team because of the obvious, but I'm not going to say it just because of your channel and everything, but I feel like with that, but also like just the sake of like now you got a younger coach who is kind of instilling like confidence in a lot of these players that they maybe not had before in the NBA. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be fun, but I think that they do have if those are the four teams next year in the second round, Like I said, I would love to see it, but I also think like depending on matchups, they could get out of it. I think that they could, depending on who they play, maybe like how the games go down the stretch. Like you're probably gonna have, like I said, Damian Lillard closing games out of those four squads is probably the safest bet of someone who you'd want with the ball. I mean, compared to like the Spurs and who they have and the Nuggets and OKC, I know of course Shea is gonna be in that mix and Jokic as well. But I just feel like Dame has done it like over and over and over again, including in the playoffs. And not to mention like if it's not him, like you still have another All Star on one side, and you got Drew Holiday as a proven champion on another, and you just got like a plethora of young guys around it. Like Shaden Sharp's even hit some big shots this year too, and you got guys who forget like big shots. You can make like big defensive plays, like Kamara and Robert Williams, like you know my boy DeWalt Reith if he gets some minutes. No, I'm just kidding, but I just really like what they got going on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've liked the way they built a lot. I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far to say as like they'd have the best closer with Jamal Murray. Jamal's been insane this season. I'm
Yeah,
not just the Nuggets guy, but I
it's
get it with
close.
Dame. With Dame, I get it because he's hit big shots for like a decade. I do think we kind of have to see like how he comes back because he's a smaller guard dealing with this Achilles injury. But I mean, at the same time, it's like Dave. Like he's gonna provide at least a high level of like shot creation and 3-point shooting, especially late in games. So yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate how high you are on this team, and I am as well. I think they have a very bright future, and just loved watching them this year for sure. So I think we can move ahead to a team. I think it's a little bit more murky here with the Memphis Grizzlies. We talked about Tiago Splitter, a coach that's really getting the best out of his players. Tomas Isolo is sort of losing the locker room, it feels like to be a little bit. Obviously, we saw that very early in the season with Ja. And I mean, in general, they're not in the like a terrible spot in the West, but I do think that some big changes are ahead. I don't think they're gonna trade Damon or I don't think they're gonna trade Ja at the trade deadline. However, that's been floated around. I just don't think the value's there, especially since he's dealing with, you guessed it, another injury. I just don't think that's in the cards. But I do think at some point they're gonna have to shake up their core. And my big question for them is like, how do you avoid a Trey Young situation with Ja?
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, I will say like you know, making a move like the Desmond Bain trade, yes, they got plenty of picks back, but I feel like when you make a trade like that, it's also like giving a clear indication is like, all right, now we're gonna like go a different direction. Like the fact that they didn't really get like a whole lot back that could help them out like at this point in time, like probably like KCP is probably the biggest one, but like that's really going to hurt a team that at one point was second seed for a couple years, and even last year prior to the like Taylor Jenkins getting fired, like in the last month, they were hanging around like that top 2 or 3 seed, and then they fell down to like the play-in area. But I feel like once they did that, it was kind of confirmed. Like, yeah, they're gonna have struggles like moving forward without him, especially when Ja's injury prone and Jaren Jackson's injury prone. And you know, I know granted, like Jaren Jackson's played a decent amount of games this year, and really most of their like young guys have too. Like Cedric Howard, he's been pretty well. And speaking of that, Jalen Wells, like I think that they have like good young guys that they could depend on. I just don't know if they're like quite all the way there yet. And I would still like I wouldn't move off of any of them just to try and like save Ja's chances of being in Memphis. I think eventually they're gonna have to move on from him. And albeit even though like I'm still a firm believer that Ja is the best player on this team, I know some people have been like, well, Jaren Jackson Jr. is like the guy now, and like what he does defensively. Like I've never once like thought anything but Ja Morant is the guy on the Grizzlies, but it's just a matter of like, well, you don't know when he's gonna play, and sometimes like he could very well be a wild card when it comes to like stuff off the court. We've seen that as well. And I just think like right now I don't know if I wouldn't say he's like depressed or anything, but I feel like he's just like not all the way great spirits like right now. Like I don't know if it's like the team or I don't know if it's just like something like personal or anything, but I just feel like right now like there's just a lot of questions with him. And I think for that like you definitely have to like look at what your offers could be. It just doesn't seem like he also has a great relationship with, I mean, for one, the coach. Like, I think that's kind of confirmed at this point, just with a lot of the stuff that's come out, but also just like much of the team in general. And I think when that happens, like, you got to look at like what you could get for him. But I do think like some of the young guys too are pretty solid. Like they're just gonna have to. It's gonna take time now because I think they missed their window of opportunity. Yeah, they got a little bit unlucky with job missing games or getting suspended some games, and then like a couple of crucial injuries. Like I'm pretty sure like Steven Adams the one year was hurt, and that like really put a damper on things. So like yeah, I think that moving Ja right now, like to answer your question, I think moving Ja is maybe like the first big priority because I think like as you mentioned too, like with the coach, like it seems like he's losing the team. Like a lot of times when those coaches get those younger teams, and not to bring up like the Steve Nash thing again, but I feel like if he were coaching a younger team at the start of his career, like that would probably set him up a little bit better for success. In a way, kind of similar, maybe like to Brad Stevens, like for you guys, like when you guys got him first, I think that that could help him out too. But I just don't think that's going to happen as long as Ja is there. And I know like they just kind of committed to Jaron, but I'm not too sure if that's I don't know. I'll leave that I guess right now, but I would also like just kind of gauge how that goes after moving off of Ja because I'm not totally sure if I would fully commit to Jaron either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you nailed it with like the Desmond Bain trade. Like my first reaction was, "Holy shit, how many picks did they get for Desmond Bain?" And then my next reaction was, "Wait, are they actually going to like fully rebuild?" And that's sort of been kicking around my mind since they made that trade in June. And yeah, I mean, you look at like the Ja Morant situation, it obviously looks like he wants out. And he could benefit from a change of scenery, all this, the coaching stuff, the relationships with the players, everything you talked about. It looks like it's time for a change for both sides. With that being said, at this point, I don't know if they can move off him at the deadline because the injury thing again. He just gets injured a million times a season. The off court problems, like we kind of hit on this, and it's for me it's tough to imagine there being a world where they don't just have like a Trey Young like return. Maybe it's a bit better than what the Hawks got for Trey, but I feel like that's where this is trending, where they just like sell kind of low on him, and the benefit is that they sold super high on Bane. So I think that sort of evens it out, but it kind of still sucks for the Grizzlies in that situation because Ja has been like their franchise guy since 2019. Yeah, I mean, in general, I think this just goes to show like how short a window can be at times. Like you look at it in 2022 when they were that two seed, everyone was like, damn, the Grizzlies are like, they have the brightest future in the league, maybe, or whatever. And it just like came crashing down, and it's really unfortunate. I mean, you look at like potentially trading Jaron. I think that has to be on the table at some point. But also, like if you trade all three of your franchise guys in a small market, it's a little rough and probably something I wouldn't advise. Totally bottoming out. Plus, like Jaren Jackson Jr. and a bunch of young guys is still probably like one of the worst teams in the West. So it's like, what are we even doing here? He's like young enough to fit this timeline. Let's just like try to rebuild around him. Cedric Howard's a guy that I absolutely love on this team, and I think that's a huge bright spot. I don't know if he has like all NBA potential, but I could see him like being like a sneaky like couple time All Star. Kind of reminds me of like a Mikal Bridges type of guy. Maybe just like a Kawhi Leonard type guy if he has like a massive leap. But that's sort of besides the point. I think that's like a real clear bright spot for this team. But yeah, in general, just a really weird future. And I don't know if we're gonna get much further clarity on them at the deadline because I just don't think they want to like sell that low on Jaw. But eventually, I think they'll be like forced to. Maybe that's this offseason. Maybe that's like next deadline. Who knows?
Yeah, I think this deadline it might be a little bit harder, like just to move off of him, but I could definitely see something like at the end of the season. I feel like at this point, like I don't know, the Grizzlies season, like yeah, there's still time. Like they could definitely like get back in the play in and stuff, but I almost feel like they don't even really want to. Like they're just kind of like going through the motions like all season long, and it's kind of depressing because it's like I feel like if they, especially early on when the Ja rumors like this season where it's like he seems unhappy or like people are saying Ja's washed and like all this stuff like. There was a month and a half in, and they were still like I think hanging around that seventh or eighth seed. It's like, hey, if like he flipped a switch, and maybe some of these like you know some of these like relationships got restored or whatever with him and like the rest of the organization, I think maybe they could have found themselves like they wouldn't have been super high anyways, but I think maybe they could have stayed around there or maybe got to the fifth or sixth seed. And I mean, who knows what could happen then? I think maybe they could win a playoff series depending who they match up with if they have an experience edge. But yeah, I don't know. I seem like they don't even really want to like attempt that. Like it seems like they've kind of just like let it go and I guess we're gonna see what happens. But just on the point too of I guess like a Trey Young like return, I would kind of agree. Although I also think like it's definitely going to be a lighter return than maybe what people would think, especially with if you looked at Ja in 2022 when he was maybe like at the peak of his powers from what we've seen so far, like it would be way lower of a deal that you're going to actually get right now compared to like what you might have thought if like Ja's on the table if it was 2022. But I also think that maybe part of that too is because in comparison to the Trey Young trade, like he wanted to go to Washington, and so they're like, all right, like I'm gonna send him to Washington. Maybe the Wizards didn't want to like, they were playing a little hardball probably because like, hey, he wants to come here, so like you kind of have to like fall more into our hands as opposed to like us falling in your hands. And I just don't know. So it really just depends like how Ja approaches it too. If he's open to a trade, I know there's been a lot of rumors, but I guess technically with where we are right now, it's like nothing's like it seems like nothing is officially confirmed, but it feels like we all kind of have that feeling like he's gonna get traded eventually. But I think that's probably the maybe the smartest way to approach it, like for him and for the franchise as well, because it could help like maybe both teams in the best scenario. Like obviously as a Donovan Mitchell fan, I think like once Rudy Gobert got traded, everyone thought like, all right, Donovan Mitchell's gonna get traded, he's gonna get traded. But I mean, a lot of stars request trades, like especially when stuff like that happens. He never requested one, like that whole time. So I mean, he kind of played it cool. The Jazz played it cool, and then sure enough, they made the deal for Markkanen and Sexton, and it's like Markkanen became an All Star, and Donovan Mitchell, he was great in Utah, but he's even better right now. So I mean, I think in a way, it was best case scenario what you could have hoped for both sides, but you know that's probably the best way they can approach it, I would say. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, for sure. We'll have to see what happens. Based on the latest reporting, I believe it was from Jake Fisher earlier this week, he said there's no teams currently interested in Ja, which is understandable, but also kind of hard to believe given what caliber of player he was a few years ago. But in the offseason, I think that changes. I think teams are just always a little bit more open in the offseason, especially like once the season plays out. Like one of these teams gets bounced in the first round and they're desperate for point guard play, maybe they'd be more willing to sort of pull the trigger on a jaw trade there. But yeah, I think we can move on to our last team here, and that's the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, when you have Cooper Flag, who's this like I don't like to use the word generational, but he's this awesome franchise star, number one overall pick, incredible rookie season. You're on his timeline now. And with that, you have your own first round pick this year. That's awesome. However, my question is how do you sort of operate on Cooper's timeline without having your first round pick after this year until 2031? And what does that sort of mean for Anthony Davis's future?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely puts a lot of pressure probably on the front office, especially after like the Nico bomb came in, and just like hey, like Luca's out the door, and now we got AD because obviously they were not expecting to have that. But yeah, I think that they're gonna have to act pretty quickly because whether it's AD or it's Clay or some of these other guys maybe that I guess aren't long term options. I would say like they could try to see what they could get for them, but I will say this. I mean, as much as obviously people are going to hate on Nico Harrison for trading Luca and stuff, I think if this team's fully healthy, I actually like this team. Like, I still think that this is a really good team, and I think that they're definitely a top 5 or 6 team. I think they could play with just about any team in the West if they're healthy because, I mean, they got the size with Gafford and Lively and, AD and, Cooper Flag. You got Najee Marshall who can space the floor. You got, like, Kyrie if he's healthy, Brandon Williams, and like PJ Washington could be like another like 3 point threat and a bigger body. So I think they have like a really solid team. A lot of these guys still from the finals team just a couple years ago. So and even some of the other guys too, like AD, Clay, Kyrie, they've all won championships elsewhere too. So it's like it's definitely for a guy like Cooper Flag such an ideal scenario for him to build around. But like you mentioned, like some of their like youth that they could be getting in over the next couple years, it's a little limited because of like what draft picks they actually have coming their way. I don't know. This is probably one of the tougher scenarios for me to like say what they should or shouldn't do. Because part of me feels like, well, they should because Kyrie is not healthy right now, and AD like seems like every year he's missing like half the games, and Clay's not the same player, so you should see what you can get for those young guys and maybe put more stability around them. But at the same time, it's like, is there a better scenario where you could learn from, three guys who have combined like six championships, another slate of dudes who have made the finals before with this coach as well? A coach who won a championship and he's made the finals multiple times in his career as a player as well. So, like, from that perspective, I'm like, I don't know if I would like be rushing to do anything, but also you got to think of like, well, AD has some value right now. What's it going to look like in a year or two, especially if he's injured again? What's Kyrie's value going to look like if he comes back? And I don't think Kyrie would like not be the same, but if he's like a sluggish start and maybe people are thinking like, oh well, might be hard for him to reach his form that he was in before. So yeah, I don't know. I do think though, if this Mavericks team was healthy, like they'd be interesting. But it would be nice if they could play at least like half a season where it's no major injuries, and then you could kind of see like, all right, like where are they really lacking? Because I don't think they really had a fair shot to do that since they traded Luca.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely agree with your point that like this roster is a little bit better than people will ever give it credit for, just because they've been dealing with so many injuries. Even if you look back to like preseason, I wasn't super high on them, but I still had them as like a fringe playoff team. Most people had them in the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, I don't think this is the worst situation in the world, as crazy as that sounds when you're looking at a team that doesn't own their future first round pick after this year until 2031. I don't think this is like the worst situation in the world, and obviously like Cooper Flag helps a ton in that. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like when you look at like Klay Thompson, Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, that's a ton of experience around Cooper, and that's an awesome situation. And then whoever they get in the draft, who knows? They could get lucky again and jump into the top three, and then obviously they're in a really good spot. Or they could just get like a middle lottery pick and then potentially have the opportunity to add a guy who has potential but can contribute immediately. I think that's a really interesting possibility, and I would probably target a guard even if you have Kyrie. I think that perimeter needs a little bit of help, especially in the floor spacing and shot creation department. And luckily, this draft offers a ton of amazing guards. So I don't think they're in the worst position in the world. But yeah, I mean, honestly, this might be like a hot take of mine. I wouldn't be very eager to trade Anthony Davis. I would, it's easier said than done, but I would try to extend him to like a reasonable team friendly deal. Again, easier said than done, but if you look at keeping Davis and just trying to be somewhat competitive with Flag, who's already proven to be an incredibly high quality level player, and then whoever you draft, Kyrie healthy, like you could be like a decent playoff team. I think that's sort of your best path to like developing Cooper and sort of surviving without your draft capital.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a pretty fair point there because I just want to see him. It's kind of the same thing what you're saying there. Like, I just kind of want to see him like have a chance, like to see how they can work together. You committed to the AD trade. Maybe not everybody was totally okay with it, but at the end of the day, it went through. It's done, and now you have him on the squad. Like, I would at least like see how that works because if you just like move off of him like before even trying anything, like it's gonna look even worse in my opinion. Like that would almost be like when you probably remember like the 4 team trade when like Dwight Howard went to the Lakers, and it's like, well, you look at those teams, like the Nuggets got better because they got like supporting players, and like the Lakers get Dwight, and the Magic got like Vucevic, obviously, who became like an important part for them, and it's like, what did the Sixers get like after Iggy went to the Nuggets? The Sixers got Andrew Bynum, never played a game for them. And then they got rid of him. And it's like, well, they just basically got rid of their best player, Andre Iguodala, for nothing. So, like, I don't know. That's a guy who became a multi-time champion. Like, you don't want to like just okay, like let's get rid of AD. I'm not saying he's gonna have like, you know, a stellar career by any means if he does leave the Mavericks because he is older, but like at least give it a chance, see how it works out. Because I feel like between AD and Kyrie and Clay, like, these are guys who maybe played together on Team USA and, played against each other in the playoffs or in the finals and stuff. Like, so at least giving them a chance to see how they work together. Like, they might not all be like the same skill wise as they once were. I think like mostly like maybe Clay at least because of the injuries he had were a little bit more severe for a player of his position. But I just like what that puts around Cooper Flag. I think Cooper Flag too, the first like month and a half of the season definitely was showing like, the typical rookie growing pains like that. I even think of, for instance, like I see Edwards there, like Anthony Edwards, like he'd had that a little bit his first rookie year too, but after 2 months, like he hit that stride. And then, I think if you were arguing like from January to the end of the year, like May or so. Well, I guess February to the end of the year because they started that year later. But he probably would win Rookie of the Year, over LaMelo that year. So, I think that Cooper Flag, like the way he's looked already, next year he's probably going to be, if he's given this much of the keys. Of course, you're going to have other stars probably coming into the mix if they don't make a trade. Like he could be playing All Star caliber maybe, and by year 3, like he probably will be an all star. And you got like AD around here, like who maybe if he's still like an all star caliber, if Kyrie's all star caliber, they don't even have to be like superstar levels. But if you have like 3 all-star level dudes and you got maybe like 5 or 6 all-star level role players, I don't see how that's like a bad scenario to be in.
I totally agree with you there. When you look at like the idea of trading Davis, like sure, it sounds great in theory, but he probably doesn't have that much of a value. So I'm not just trying to sell low on him. And yeah, I mean, with Cooper, I totally agree. I mean, I've been so impressed with what he's been able to do with this surrounding cast around him. And he gets thrown into the fire a little bit, playing point guard for the first few months. And I mean, the last couple of months have been really incredible. And I think it says a lot about him. I mean, obviously, like, I was like, yeah, he's the number one prospect in the class and stuff. But heading into the year, I was a little bit curious to see what it would look like, especially offensively, especially when I heard he was going to be playing point guard. To start off. Obviously, they've moved him back to his natural position, but I was just curious to see how it looked. I honestly wasn't expecting him to be this good this fast, and I think that just says a lot about him. And I mean, the future, at least when you have a player as special as Cooper Flag, the future is at least like somewhat bright in Dallas, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm hoping, like, I don't know. I just want to see like the Mavericks for one full season. Give us one full season, and then if it looks terrible, if it goes awful, then you can start cutting ties with some of the guys. But I just hate like that. I hear like they're already like considering or listening to offers for like whether it's Gafford or if it's like Najee Marshall or even maybe D'Lo, who I mean I guess he hasn't had like the greatest run in Dallas right now, but I still feel like he's an NBA player, and I still feel like he should be getting minutes regardless. So just giving like some of those guys more of an opportunity to play all as one, like I think it'd be good. I think that they could upset a team maybe, but yeah, we'll just see.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to see. I mean, it definitely depends on what you can get. Like if somebody is willing to trade, like Najee Marshall's been fantastic. Like if somebody's willing to trade like a first round pick and then maybe something else for him, I'd consider moving off of him. But at the same time, I wouldn't be eager to because he's just a guy that can really fit with any team, especially this Mavericks team. And yeah, I mean, in general, I do feel like they kind of have a nice roster that has just been totally injury riddled. And yeah, they do need a little bit more perimeter creation. They need a little bit more shooting, but overall, I don't think they're in a terrible spot, but I do think it will be interesting to see how this plays out because they're sort of forced to at least aim to be competitive. With despite having a younger Cooper Flag just because of their draft capital situation. With that being said, I think we can close it out here with questions from the audience. This time we only have one question. It's from our guy Ryan Drew, and he just wants to know: Are the Suns legit?
It's a great question. I would say I think they're definitely legit as a playoff contender, and I think that their ceiling is probably second round exit. So I'll let him be the judge of that if that's what he would consider legit. If you mean like championship wise, no, then I wouldn't say they're legit. I think that they're still bits away. But just like I was saying with Portland earlier, I think like when you have a team that has like so many well rounded players, especially supporting like your best player, like you know, I wouldn't say like Devin Booker, like I mean, he's had a solid year, but I think he's even had better seasons, and they've still like won games even when he's not playing, or maybe if he's not had a great game. Because I think Colin Gillespie and Grayson Allen have been like a perfect backcourt together. I think Dylan Brooks has played like he almost belongs in the All Star game. I know they're not going to put him in it probably, but he's playing like he's warranting an All Star appearance. Like he's been that good. I think Royce O'Neal, like he's another guy who's a veteran. He's been in teams that like with Utah who have been like really successful with Brooklyn. So it's like he's just playing his role well. And I think that it's very similar. I've said this to a couple people too. Like, maybe the shooting element's a little bit different, like now as opposed to was it then. But I think of like those Suns teams, like maybe in the like late '90s, like when they had like Steve Nash and Jason Kidd and Kevin Johnson and like Cedric Sabalos and like all these guys together. Like I think who else? Like Rex Chapman was on there like as a guard, and then you just had like a couple bigs to like round it out. And I think that's kind of like what you have here. Like Mark Williams and maybe Oso and like Nick Richards. Like those are like your three main bigs. And I wouldn't really consider any of them like elite floor spacers or maybe floor spacers at all. But I think that it's very four out, one in feel to it in terms of what the players can do. And I feel like that's been a recipe for success for a while in the NBA, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. Every now and then you might come across like championship level teams like the Nuggets where they have like Jokic who could pretty much do everything. But I feel like for the most part, like you have like four guys who can be perimeter threats, they can like attack the basket, and then you have your big who, you know, can defend at the basket, who can rebound. I think that's why even when I had you on my show recently and like we were talking about Minnesota, it's like, people talk about like Rudy Gobert in like a negative light, but it's like at the end of the day, like, yeah, he might, make mistakes or people might pick on him or whatever, like on the court, but he is like an ideal prototype you want as your big. And I feel like, Suns don't have maybe a player as important or as good as Rudy Gobert at doing that, but they have multiple guys who can do that same role, maybe just on a lesser level, and maybe you can space them out minute wise. So I know that's a very long answer to say I think they're a legit playoff team, but in terms of like contending for a title, I would say no. But I do think that the direction they're in right now is probably the best thing you could have asked for after trading Kevin Durant last summer.
Yeah, most definitely. I completely agree with you there. I mean, if you look at this Suns team, I do think they're going to be in the playoffs. Probably still a playing team and then they get in, but maybe they can shake things up and be a top six seed. I wouldn't put it past them. I would say like they're probably going to be a first round exit. I think there's like a 90% chance of that. But if they play the Los Angeles Lakers, I think there's a decent chance that they can move ahead to that second round because I think the Suns are a really great matchup for the Lakers, or a really bad matchup for the Lakers rather. You look at the Suns, they're kind of the opposite of what the Lakers are, and this is a team that last year the Suns were just constructed in interesting way, I would say. They had a ton of star power, but it didn't really make sense. And it's the complete opposite this year. Obviously, you still have Booker, but to your point, Booker isn't having this like otherworldly season. It's really they got pieces that fit around Booker. And I think that's like my biggest takeaway from this team. And I mean, Jordan Ott's doing a fantastic coaching job as well. I'd be remiss to not mention that. But at the same time, I think just from a roster building perspective, this is such an important lesson to teams around the league that you don't have to chase stars. You really just have to find players who fit around your star. And I feel like that point should just be hammered home by this team. And yeah, like you said, just a really fun team to watch and an awesome story around the league. But yeah, and not a team that I would take seriously as like anything more than like a fun and frisky like playoff team.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned too Jordan Ott because I mean he was one of the reasons why Cleveland was so well last season. And obviously now the Cavs have been playing a little bit better, but I think like they probably got off to a slower start at the beginning of the year, not just because of injuries, but also like they had a change in coaching dynamic, and he was out of the picture and he was in Phoenix, and helping to lead them. So definitely should be up there as like a he probably won't win coach of the year realistically because they love to give it to guys who are top two or top three seeds. But, he should be top three or four in the voting for the award, I would say, at the end of the year. And then just to even mention, I mean, I would agree. I think their likeliest scenario is they are a first round exit. And I mean, of course, seems like most of the year they've been hanging around the play in. I think right now, at the time we're recording this, they're like right above it. So that could change. It's also close between like the fifth and seventh seed. I think like them, Minnesota, and the Lakers. But so they might. Who knows what happens there? But I still feel like Lakers definitely have a chance to beat them. I've even said that to my one friend who is a Lakers fan, and he's like, "Oh, there's no way, man." And I'm like, "Hey, man, the Suns have depth, and they have a pretty solid, defensive identity around him too. There's like, I respect like, Luka has been playing insane. You could argue the best offensive player this season, maybe. And of course, they'll still have like Austin Reeves and LeBron come playoff time, you'd think. But, I just think that all around, like the Suns have more. And I would even say, like, I definitely would not give him much of a chance against a healthy Denver team. I wouldn't really give him much of a chance against a healthy Thunder team, even though they did beat him in a game this year. But I still think maybe they could even be a wild card against they play Houston, just because Houston has had like a little bit of a weird offense themselves, and I feel like the Suns maybe could exploit that. And then I would also say that on top of that, the Spurs are another team maybe that they could. I mean, I know the Spurs have been great this year, but we also have to factor in like even though they've looked so dominant, they've looked so poised as a young team, they are still a young team. And this is really their first year of getting to this experience. Whereas some of these guys, like, yes, the first year the Suns have had this core, but it's like, Devin Booker's made the finals before, and Royce O'Neal's been to plenty of playoffs before, and Dylan Brooks has been to the playoffs before a lot. So, you know, they definitely could stun them. And I will even bring up that, earlier in the year, I remember like the first week and a half or 2 weeks, like I remember Wemby was up there as number one in MVP, and then first game he played against the Suns was probably his worst game of the year. So not going to say that he's going to play like a total fraud if he does play him in the playoffs, but I definitely think that they could be a team that could slow him down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think those two teams are definitely fair. We talked about the Lakers already, but yeah, the Spurs. I do remember that game where Wemby just struggled, and I think they're like just such a smart defensive team that maybe they could make things interesting. Ultimately, to beat a team like the Spurs or Rockets, I think they would have to have like an injury break their way. Not even saying like a Wemby level injury, but like just like a starter level player. I do think that's what it would take. But I wouldn't completely rule it out, and I think they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs, no matter who they play. And then with the Rockets, man, would that be poetic if they beat KD in a playoff series. I wouldn't count on it, but that would be a fun playoff series to watch regardless. But yeah, just a super fun team in general, and happy that they turned things around because it was looking pretty bleak. I mean, after last season, and ultimately I wasn't very like high on them heading into this season at all. I thought they were in kind of a rough spot, but they've transformed things, and it just again the importance of fit is just so vital in today's NBA, especially just fit and depth. I think is just overlooked by many teams, but it's so important, and the Suns are just a prime example of it. And yeah, we'll see how things shake out for them, but regardless, it's been an awesome story.
Yeah, if I had to put it like in percentages, I would say probably like an 85% chance that they make the playoffs and lose in the first round. I think there's a 10% chance that they lose in the second round, and I would say a 5% chance they miss the playoffs altogether. Because I mean, granted, like they have been hanging around the play-in for a while, so it's like they could be that 7 seed. You lose a game to the Warriors, like you're probably lined up to play the Clippers, and I mean the Clippers have been so good lately that it's like who knows? Like they could win on a 1 game scenario. I feel like really even Portland could, but I mean, especially the way the Clippers have played, and they have probably a little bit more veteran experience. That you know, I definitely like. There is still an avenue where they do miss the playoffs altogether, but I think likely a scenario first round exit, and I wouldn't pick them over the Spurs or Rockets if I was a betting man, but I'm no Chauncey Billups. If I were, I would probably still have them losing in the first round. The Lakers are an interesting one though, so I will say that could be more of a coin flip.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very fair percentage breakdown. I think that's roughly what I would have them at as well. So yeah, for sure. I think we can wrap it up here, though. Appreciate you hopping on the show. Before we officially close it out, though, I just want to give you a chance to plug your work, tell our listeners where they can find you at.
Yes, sir. Well, appreciate you having me on the show. If you guys want to check me out, you can find me at Super Mario Hoops 24 on YouTube. Honestly, you can just go there and then in the channel description, like I kind of have like my link tree so you can find like my Twitter or I guess X is what people are calling it now. I'm still never gonna get over that. But Instagram's in there and TikTok, so pretty much anything if you want to keep finding me and stuff. But yeah, I'll always be rooting for the Chicago Bulls, but I'll also be keeping it as real as possible. And then yeah, just for the sake of our show, I'm hoping 2027 we get at least one more Portland Denver matchup so we can see Damian Lillard and Jamal Murray go at it in the clutch because that would be iconic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Appreciate you hopping on the show. It was a ton of fun chopping it up, talking hoops with you. And yeah, make sure you guys go check out his work. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace out. All right, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Cassels Cast. Once again, shout out to Super Mario Hoops for hopping on the show. Make sure to go check out his work. Link will be in the description. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.